Hey there, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where I want to think more deeply with you about Christian faith and life. Hey believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and you think I'm a believer's welcome. I want to think out loud with you today about faith. How should we define faith? And how does the biblical worldview process reality versus the way Western society processes reality? But first, have you ever stopped and asked yourself, how do I process reality? Do you merely do that only unconsciously? Do you do that, to borrow from a prior episode, like a sheeple? Do you unwittingly follow along with however the dominant culture processes reality? What if you began doing reality differently? What if you dared to be different in the way you actually process reality? What would that adventure be like? Well, for its unique part, the Bible doesn't start with the presupposition of doubt that very likely characterizes your current life. The Bible is an amazingly, magnificently alternate way of construing and processing reality. If right now you're listening and you're listless, characterized by ennui, and if I'm throwing some French at you, you know that it must be important. It might be because you've been told there's no meaning to life. Maybe you feel that ennui because you don't feel a sense of purpose. And honestly, I'm willing to bet a big chunk of your ennui is because the undergirding mood of your life is disbelief rather than belief. Belief in God will make you happier. Now, I'm not a therapist. I'm not prescribing belief in God so you'll be happier. I'm too committed to truth to say slogans to you or to suggest bumper stickers to you, but belief in God and happiness are borne out by statistical studies. Why is that? Why does it work that way? Because belief in God builds a natural foundation, a transcendent foundation for life's purpose and meaning and relationship and calling. When I was a young boy, when I was a young boy, when I was a young boy, my mom, her name was Valerie, God bless her. Mom would let me and my brothers and my sister buy 2 or 3. I think it was 3, but I don't remember exactly. We'd get to buy books out of the little paper pamphlet order forms. If you can remember the name of that company, let me know. Was it Scholastic? Honestly, I simply loved the excitement of picking out a book or 2 or 3 and anticipating that coming in the mail and then devouring it when it arrived. My clever mom, she would make us go to bed at 8 p.m., and I remember laying in bed as an elementary school kid when it was still light outside. I could look out the window. I longed to be outside. It was just torture. Doggone it. Other kids were outside. I could hear them. She'd make us kids go to bed early, but here's where Mom was clever. She would let us read in bed as long as we wanted. So I'd lay there and read my book, some fantasy or some adventure, and I'd imagine what life was like in that magical story. And reading all those books over all those years not only deeply formed me as a lexophile, but it taught me to live in a world that was alive, profound, meaningful. There were actually moral consequences, but there was also adventure and wonder and risk. And as a result, I believe there was more to life than simply energized matter. As a kid, I grew up with an imagination that let me know life was bigger than insidious power plays. Well, the Bible holds a similarly energizing worldview. The Bible's full of amazing stories, and it's not afraid to describe and confront human nature as it really is. The Bible is an amazingly dynamic book. For our thinking together, I want you to know that the Bible, without prelude or any explanation, begins with belief. And then it patterns and repeats that mood or that way of being or that way of doing reality, belief, throughout the whole Bible. That doesn't mean the Bible isn't aware of disbelief, but the undergirding and constant approach to reality of the Bible is one of belief. And as I suggested in the last episode, following my mentors Newbegin and von Balthasar, the Bible does this belief unpacking without any prior foundation laying, without any prior argumentation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it says that without an intro or a prelude or any philosophic explanation of what it's about to try to do with us and for us and to us. And honestly, it's utterly perplexing. Here's another example of the Bible's methodology. This morning, my 2-year-old blue-eyed sweetie of a granddaughter was watching a DVD about the story of Moses. I watched when God appears to Moses in that perpetually burning desert bush. When God was finished speaking to Moses, Moses says to him, "What should I tell your people? Who shall I tell them sent me?" And God, we know now, famously responds, "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent me to you." That's crazy, right? Think of it. God didn't say, "Wow, Moses, weren't you just watching a perpetually burning desert bush? Isn't that enough proof for you?" Or God doesn't say to Moses, "Goodness grief, a bush was just talking to you. Tell them you can prove there's a God because you just encountered a talking bush." You and I know that either of those answers would have been solid Cartesian answers, but they would have only begged the question. Because then what would the people have said? "Moshe, show us that bush." And of course, if and when Moses walked them out into the desert and showed them the bush would have been neither burning nor talking, and the people, if they were from the year 2017, would have laughed at gullible Moses, silly Moses, Cro-Magnon Moses for telling such a goofy story. Poor Moses. No. God gives Moses zero external appeal. There is no external reference. Instead, and truthfully, God audaciously tells Moses, "I am who I am." That statement has layers and layers of meaning about God's identity. Believe me, rabbis and scholars and theologians and philosophers have been unpacking the implications of that verse for millennia. It gets really deep if you get into philosophy books or commentaries on the Exodus. But for our purpose today, what God is saying to Moses is, there's no proof outside of me that proves me. There's no greater than me to which I can appeal to prove that I exist. If there was a greater than me, you would be compelled to worship and follow that greater instead of me, but I am the eternal one. I am the uncaused one. I am the faithful one. I am the present one. Is that circular? Yes. Is that self-referential for God to speak like that? Yes. But think of it. If God is God, eternal, uncaused, perfect, perfectly one, holy, the source of all being, beyond all being, the source of all knowledge, beyond all knowledge, the very fountain of all true love. If God is God, then what else could God have said? To what else could God have appealed except God? That would be the truth, and there is no greater than God. Or if you'll wander with me for a minute, because my mind loves to wander, and I will confess to you that my mind wanders not infrequently while I'm at church. God could have said to Moses when Moses asked, "Who shall I tell them sent me?" God could have said, "Because," right? Moses says, "Who shall I tell them sent me?" And God could have said, "Me, because." And someday, dear listener, if and when you're a parent, may God have mercy on your soul. You will realize that actually sometimes "because" is a reasonable answer. But praise God, God didn't leave it at an arbitrary "because." I apologize to any God-fearing Muslim friends who are listening, but God is not so arbitrary as I hear proponents of your religion putting it. Or, sorry to any believers of the Reformed Christian persuasion listening today, but God is not so arbitrary as I hear your tradition putting it. Yes, God can do anything he wants, but he doesn't. God doesn't act out of caprice. God doesn't do things because. Instead, let me say it again, God says to Moses, "I am who I am. There's no greater source for my being than me. There's no greater being before which you have bowed and removed your sandals than me. I am." O.M. gosh. When Jesus says that very thing in John 8, his audience has a heart attack. Their eyes begin to bulge with anger, and thick, smelly gray foam begins rolling out of their mouths because they know he's claiming something that a man oughtn't to claim. Or let's put this still differently for you. Think with me. There is no proof of a miracle that is greater than the miracle. So from my own life, if I told you that after a terrible automobile accident I was in as a teenager, I told you that I separated my left shoulder, and I separated a shoulder on the same side that I cracked my collarbone. If I told you that that separated left shoulder healed and recovered in ways that doctors said it was unexpected, and then you said to me, "Prove it," well, I sure could show you my shoulder, and I could show you the rather gruesome-looking scars on the front and back of my shoulder, and I could let you, I guess, with your finger, feel the place where my collarbone was cracked. But even if I showed you all of that, I couldn't prove what happened was miraculous. Prove it, Ed. Well, I can't. I can only tell you it happened. And you can believe it or not. But if I could explain the miracle, it wouldn't be a miracle. If there was something outside of the miracle that explained the miracle, then our final appeal wouldn't be to the miracle, but to the thing outside the miracle, right? And I hope you're thinking with me like that, because it's important that we see the logic of some of this. Back to the Bible. The Bible isn't asking us to believe some argument. The Bible doesn't approach us, and my, oh my, how it can approach us. It doesn't approach us and ask us to make a well-executed, deeply reason-based decision. Instead, the Bible presents the living God to us and then waits to hear and see our response. The Bible doesn't let us put God under a microscope so we can examine him. And again, to me, this is all very audacious. In Isaiah 1:18, the prophet says, "Come, let us reason together." It's one of my favorite verses because if you can't tell, I like reason. But when the prophet says, "Come, let us reason together," he's not inviting an open-minded disputation on the existence of God. His presupposition, like the presupposition of all the prophets and then the greatest prophet, the Nazarene, who, as it turned out, is far more than a prophet. The presupposition is that God exists and causes and judges and loves. Isaiah's presupposition is faith. He's inviting others, his readers, to come and think with him about what the existence and being of God means for reality. He's not seeking out faith in faith. He's not seeking out blind faith. He's seeking faith in God as the presupposition for the entire process of reasoning. Or, Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It's not saying there are no smart people who don't believe in God. Of course, there are brilliant folks who are atheists. But the proverb is saying that the biblical worldview understands there is no real, no abiding, no societally healing wisdom apart from a holy reverence for God. The whole Bible, written by dozens of different writers across a couple millennia, proceeds this way. You can start with belief in God or not, but there's no way to progress with the rest of the way or the rest of the lifestyle or the rest of the waltz or the rest of the banquet or the rest of the playing on the playground, which is my favorite way to think about it. There's no way to do the rest of it unless you begin with faith in God. All of this is fascinating to me. I pay acute attention to the moods and words and directions of the church. And today there are all manner of church folk who say, and they're saying it's kind of a mind blower for me. They're saying it now more than during any other time in my life. It doesn't matter what you believe, it only matters what you do. Now, we all know that our doing stems from our being, and that our doing shapes our being, and we all know that the Lord calls us to do and not just be, right? Christianity is an entire way of life. Christianity is not simply a doctrinal system. Christianity is not solely some intellectual way to perceive life, but what those folks who focus on doing miss out is that doing is not where the Bible begins. Doing is not the foundation. Evangelicals are famous for teaching on the necessity of a relationship with Jesus. They use phrases that are strange to non-believers. Evangelicals say things like, "Have you asked Jesus into your heart? Do you know Jesus? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus?" And honestly, sometimes it can sound a little preachy, or more, it can sound a little bit personal. But what evangelicals, God bless you, rightly do is start where the Bible starts, and the Bible starts with faith. The Bible doesn't start with doing, the Bible starts with faith. It's time for a movie review. Let's take a break and enjoy a movie review. Murder on the Orient Express. Produced by Kenneth Branagh, who also stars as the movie's hero, Detective Hercule Poirot. It's not Hercules, it's Hercule Poirot. Is a remake of a movie by the same name in 1974. It's based on a book written by Agatha Christie from 1934, and the recent release is a period piece film about the great fictional Belgian detective, again named Hercule Poirot. Now, the movie has some big-name acting stars in it. Johnny Depp, and spoiler alert, his character gets murdered. I don't think that's too much of a tell. Penelope Cruz is in there, Judi Dench, Michelle Pfeiffer, Willem Dafoe. So there's several big stars in the movie. The train, named the Orient Express, leaves from Istanbul, Turkey, and is headed to somewhere in Western Europe toward London, where Poirot makes his hometown. I liked the movie because it had some beautiful train on the mountainside snow scenes. It had some fun scenes depicting well-dressed folks in early 20th century attire. Mostly the movie was a whodunit. So at some time sometime you've played the game Clue. When I was a kid, I loved the game Clue. And at the beginning of the movie, before even meeting the possible criminals, I leaned over to my wife and friends and said, "The slutty wife in the library with a candlestick." I wanted to pick beforehand who was going to commit the murder. So as the viewer, I was, trying to guess from the beginning who was the murderous villain. And of course, only Poirot is clever enough, cunning enough, astute enough to solve the crime of murder. Me, I enjoyed some of the visual scenes. I also enjoyed some of the humorous moments, but overall it was lacking. The characters were not developed carefully enough for me to care about them, and I didn't know whether to like them or disdain them. I wanted to see and learn and know more about each character and why they would have had the motive to murder. So for me, the characters were rather flat. Too much of the focus was on Poirot and his eccentricities and his intellectual abilities, rather than upon the characters involved in the story. Did you ever watch a movie where in the end you didn't care if the villain was caught or killed or not? Have you ever seen a movie where you didn't care if at the great reveal the bad guy or the good guy was axed, if only because the film hadn't done enough to make you emotionally commit one way or another? Well, Murder on the Orient Express was that film, because when the grand reveal was finally executed, I found myself thinking, meh, so what? The producers wanted us to think some lesson in human nature had been delivered, but I was less convinced. Was it fun to watch? Yes. Was it entertaining? Yeah. Was it an enjoyable period piece? Yes. Was there some great insight into the jumbled confusion we call human nature? No. Was there some great philosophic lesson to be learned about murdering someone on a steam engine train? No. So, on the Rybarczykian Stations of the Cross rating system, where only Jesus gets 14 stations of the cross, only Jesus gets high and lifted up, Murder on the Orient Express gets 9 stations, or, for you college types, that's the grade of C. I wanted more. What is faith? Let's define that. Well, first, it's not mere mental assent. James wrote, "Even the demons believe and shudder." The demons? They know God is holy and judge and destroyer, and all of that makes them recoil in horror. So clearly, God is not looking for mere intellectual assent. And this is important because probably like me, you know quite the sizable group of folks who will tell you, actually, I do believe in God. Yes, I believe there is a God who started it all. As if all God is really looking for is to be acknowledged, right? God will be supremely happy if we just give him a shout out. Right? Wrong. As if your close friends exist merely to be acknowledged, or as if your husband or wife merely wants during daily life to be acknowledged because they exist. No. No. True relationship goes deeper. To express faith in God, as the Bible shows over and over, requires more than mere mental assent. Or to put it in Jesus' gospel terms, faith requires a response. And as I said in an earlier episode, that response comes to us immediately personal. It wants something personal from us. So what's faith? Well, first, it's not mere mental assent. Second, what is faith? It is a human capacity as basic to us as love. Let me be theological, or maybe it's a bit philosophical for a moment. I believe the human person, or what it means to be human, is a fixed entity, a fixed nature, a defined series of capacities. In my understanding, the human person today is the same as the human person was when we stumbled, or more likely sprinted out of Eden eons ago. What is that nature? For me, it's personal. The definition of what it means to be human is to be a person. Okay, me thinking, all right, Ed, going on this long philosophic bender. What is a person? Answer. A person is someone capable of relationship across a vast sweep of configurations, limitations, and possibilities. Among other things, this means that we are fascinatingly pliable, amazingly plastic, and profoundly shapeable. We can adapt to an amazing array of environments. Human beings have been living in the desert and the Arctic tundra and the jungle and the fertile plain for millennia on end. We can adapt. Are you still listening? Thank you so much if you are. Our fixedness, then, is our pliability. We are constantly pliable, or we are pliably constant. And I'm not exercising double speak. I'm not trying to be profound for no reason. I really believe all of that. A long time ago, I had a professor say to me, when I asked him how hard it was for him to have learned how to read in Hebrew, he said, Ed, in Germany, the mentally handicapped speak German. He was saying to me that we are, even many mentally handicapped people are, profoundly pliable and capable and adaptable and amenable. As an essential part of our personhood, we are capable of extending trust here and there, or refusing to extend it here and there. We can, for a million reasons, have relationship with people, or we can, for a million reasons, refuse to have relationship with other people. And all of that goes to our plasticity, our personhood. Faith is a capacity within our personhood as basic to us as love. You see, when we say the word faith, some people think it's a word to denote a religious zealot, or someone who lives their life in a fantasy world of psychedelic dragonflies and leprechauns, or that it's a retarded perspective concerning the world of facts. But all people have faith. Whether or not they will admit it, they have faith in the perspective of someone or someone's else. This is just an unavoidable fact of being human. We all do reality following someone else. People who do reality alone live by themselves in the city, or people who do reality alone often live out in the desert, left to their own narrow and, over time, increasingly bizarre thoughts. Faith is a capacity to us, and it's as basic as love. Third, how should we think about faith? Faith is an organ of vision. In the 14th century, in Greece, there lived a mystic philosopher, and his name was Gregory Palamas. Say Palamas, class. I expect you to say Palamas, teacher. I get an enormous rush of power when I hear a class say whatever word I tell them to say, followed by teacher. At the age of 20, Palamas joined a monastic community at Mount Athos outside of Thessaloniki in Greece, and for 8 years there he practiced unceasing prayer. And then he left Mount Athos, and for 10 more years he lived in a mountain cave where he practiced silence in God's presence, and he became a famous mystic, a famous prayer who taught other people to pray, and he said famously that faith is an organ of vision. It's a muscle that has to be strengthened and trained over time, just like our lungs or our cardiovascular capacity, or like our triceps or our thighs. Right? A little over a year ago, I'd been a lump, and so I began doing push-ups. I started doing 10 a day, and now I'm happy to report I'm up to 40, but it's because I had to build that upper body strength up. Faith has to be strengthened over time. And as an organ of vision, faith helps us see things we couldn't otherwise see. I want to give you some examples of how faith functions as an organ of vision. If you know me, you know math is not my forte. My brother Jim, he was a math stud. Me, that complex math gift flew right over. Even still, when I was in high school algebra, I simply just couldn't get at how an algebraic formula would solve a problem. The teacher would be putting numbers and letters on the board, and I would sit there at my desk drooling like an idiot. Not really, but it's just fun to imagine me sitting there drooling like an idiot. But I would be perplexed. Countless times that year I had to trust in faith my math teacher when she told me that the formula would solve the problem before us. And when I applied that formula, and usually I got it, always too late, after the test, when I applied that formula, I found that it really worked. The teacher was right. I kid you not. I would have an emotional flood of delight when I correctly solved the problem. And I would realize that I understood the logic of the formula. I'm happy to tell you that I earned a B in that class, and man, was I proud of that B because I worked my butt off for it. But my point is that the algebra teacher taught me to see things I couldn't see, kind of invisible things like math formulas, so that I was beginning to see the way she could see with her organ of vision. Or here's an example from architecture. For 8 years out of college, right, because I had a religion degree and I had a youth pastorate blow up in my face, so it makes perfect sense. None of you will be able to relate to this. For 8 years out of a religion degree in college, I ended up working in construction. And for the two different companies I worked for, we'd get the blueprints from the architect, and then we'd build out an estimate of what it would cost us to do the job as a subcontractor. And once and if we got the job, everyone, dozens and even hundreds of people, would be conducting their work based on a blueprint, a set of drawings that were the basis of the building. And everyone would be imagining their work based on what those architectural renderings looked like, what the dimensions and measurements showed. All of us were guided by the organ of vision of the architect. We all would imagine our part of the work based on the imagination of the architect. And honestly, construction was fun for me in that sense of watching something grow right up out of bare dirt. Or example number 3 of how faith is an organ of vision. I know that some of you like watching the Food Network, whether it's Chopped or Diners or Drive-Ins and Dives or Eats East Meets West or Toothless Debbie or Emerald or Barefoot Contessa. You like learning how to mix different ingredients and cook them differently or just so in order to produce the so tasty flavor. But the rub is, pun intended, the rub is that you have to have faith in the show or in the cook or in the host or in the chef. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to cook what they make. You have to trust that they know what they're doing if you're going to cook like them. And the truth is, you watch their shows because you do trust them and you precisely want to be able to fashion their delectable recipes. Your faith in them enables you to see or to know that there's more to life than top ramen. Your faith functions as an organ of vision regarding the possibilities of cooking. So what is faith? It's not mere mental assent, but it is a human capacity, and it is an organ of vision. And then importantly, as it concerns a walk with Christ, faith is trust. What the Lord wants, the Bible teaches over and over and over, is trust. And trust requires knowledge. Martin Luther, 16th century reformer, famously defined faith as trust. So let me give you an example of this. Let me use my wife, Tanya, as an analogy. We were in college together, and we didn't know each other, but during a fifth floor men's and women's floor skit rehearsal, we met. And I met her. She was an attractive brunette, she had a pretty smile, and a nice figure, and I'm just telling you the truth. We ended up going to church together, and as we got to know each other, I realized how dazzlingly smart she was, and I'm going to ask you, please don't tell her that I just said that, because she's going to insist on winning all of the arguments from here on out. But I also began to ask her questions about who she is, what she liked, what she didn't like, and we began to build a relationship based on interest, and mutual self-interest, and shared interests, and shared values, and shared vision for life, shared purpose for life. All of that relationship required trust. I didn't have blind faith in Tanya. I didn't have blind trust in Tanya. My faith in her was not in faith, as against the way fundamentalists talk about it, but neither was my relationship with Tanya based on my own mind's ability to perfectly perceive her, as in the liberals' practice of the Cartesian model. Instead, I began to get to know her. I began to get a sense of her own internal wiring. I began to reflect on who she was, and so I asked her more questions, and I grew to enjoy spending more and more time with her. And I liked very much the way that she challenged me, and she challenged my wiring. I couldn't finally go in for a tame best friend. And most of our dates consisted of wandering around Balboa Island and talking and sharing our dreams and our hopes and who we were. But the point for our thinking today is that her relationship with me grew out of trust and growth, and I increasingly grew to understand her and know her, and it was the same with her toward me. When I hear Christians say today, again, far too often, Christianity's just about doing good things for Jesus. You don't need to know or understand anything, just do good. Or especially among millennials, I hear, just do nice. Because after all, Jesus' greatest quality was how nice he was to people, right? Oh my gosh, rabbit trail. Just thinking that way causes me to wonder a couple things. First, and I'm sorry, but I can't help myself, I always quietly think about people who believe that Jesus' greatest attribute was his niceness. I always think, you clearly haven't carefully read the Bible. You'd never say such a thing if you actually read what Jesus did and said, and if you understood him in his context. Even when Jesus showed mercy and grace, it wasn't always nice. Not always on the first level. But second, when I hear millennials say just do good or just do nice, I think to myself, you have the cart before the horse. Your tail is wagging your dog. Your doing is wagging your being. Your doing is wagging your trust. Here's the rub, guys. Your doing places the center of the relationship on your action, rather than trusting in the identity, communication, and character of God. Right? Because just what is nice, or just what is compassion? And why again and again and again are you the center of your worldview? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. For all of the problems that came out of the 16th century Reformation, and there actually were some problems that came out and created later still other problems. For all of those problems, the Reformers got it right. Christianity is, following Jesus of Nazareth is, first about faith and trust. The New Testament, from Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels to the Revelation at the end, shows that it's not good works that put us in a relationship with Jesus. It's faith. What is faith? Trust. What does trust involve? Commitment, risk, following even though the end result is not entirely clear. Trust involves saying yes even when we don't know how it is all going to conclude. Trust involves a commitment to the other person as a person, even though I don't know exactly how things or events or circumstances are going to conclude. And if you know me, I'm fascinated by history. I really want to see how it's all going to wind up. I want to see in the end which culture ultimately transforms which culture. What values will, when human history is all said and done, what values will be the winning and healing and transformative values? Now, all of that's the case, and I still follow Jesus Christ, even though it's entirely possible that I'm never going to know how it all ends. My following of Jesus is not because he promised me omniscience or a perfect perspective or a grand parade of shiny happiness at the end of human history. I follow him because he's Jesus. I follow him because he is true. He's truth itself. I follow him because he's good, goodness itself. I follow Jesus because he's beautiful. He is beauty itself. When I was working on my master's degree, I was in a theological class about eschatology, and we were reading personal eschatology. We were reading all the different ways that it might turn out for human beings: white throne judgment and exposure and public truth-telling and shame and worry and concern and resurrection and annihilation. Would our souls be obliterated, or would we go to sleep? And I was laying in bed there worrying. And the Holy Spirit whispered to me as clear as day, "But will you trust me?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And when I answered that way, I experienced an immediate peace wash through my being. Because I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but I know that he's good and true and loving and beautiful. And I don't know how history is going to turn out in the end, but I trust in the goodness of God. And I believe that he's going to do you and me and the whole creation right. But, and this is critical, the emphasis about a biblically defined faith is not so much on the individual person's, that means your faith, as it is on what is your faith in. This is important, so I'll say it again. It's not so much the quality, how flawlessly do you believe, of your subjective faith, as it is what or whom your faith is in. This is critical. I had students who for 25 years would say about discussions of faith in class, "But Ed, Hindus have faith, Muslims have faith. Many of them live their lives with more integrity to their faith than most Christians I know." And when I would get challenged, and I love being challenged and having people think, I would respond, "Okay, so if a Satanist has honest faith, does that matter? If a Satanist sacrifices the neighborhood cat to the great horned destroyer, but they do that in an earnest, heartfelt belief. Is that satisfactory to you? Or if a witch has genuine faith that casting a spell on her boss is good, is the witch saved by her faith? Because after all, she has faith. Or if someone believes in a false god, but they believe with sincerity, doesn't that matter to God? After all God really wants is that we have faith. No. What really matters is that we have faith in Him, in the living God, in the one God. So my point, when it comes to biblical faith, the Holy Spirit is not looking for faith in faith, or faith in Satan, or perfect faith, or unblemished faith, or faith in spell casting, or faith in goodness. Not at all. The Holy Spirit is looking for faith in God. Why is that? God saves. The Bible summons us to faith in the Creator. Why is that? Because He alone gives life. Jesus called people to repent from their old ways and turn toward the Father God. Why is that? Because only God the Father brings lasting beauty and healing to one's soul. Faith, oh faith, faith, you beautiful dynamic you. Faith, you are wondrous. Faith is amazing. Near the end of His earthly ministry, Jesus, anticipating human nature, said, "When the Son of Man returns, will He find faith on the earth?" Why would He say that? Because faith is trust, and trust is love, and love is goodness, and goodness is beautiful. And faith in God connects us to all of those glorious dynamics. Thanks for listening today. Next episode, I'm going to think with you about doubt. What is doubt? Is doubt always of the devil? Is all doubt bad? If you're like me, you struggle with doubt. So, is all doubt evil? Ah, merci beaucoup. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to the Uncensored Unprofessor today. Hugs to you all today. Please, and I've been delighted with how many of you have been contacting me with questions and suggestions and comments at uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. No one sent me a joke yet. I need some jokes. Please go and rate me on iTunes. And I'm happy to say that you can also now hear me on YouTube. You can watch a video of my logo and hear me talking. And, oh yeah, Toothless Debbie, I made her up. I just wanted to discern whether you're listening. Turn your brains on, everybody.